Hello and welcome. You're watching World at War. I'm your host, Shivan Chanana. General Mark Milley has made a dire prediction. According to him, the Ukrainian counter-offensive may last only for about 30 more days before it is disrupted by the weather. Backed with Western weapons, the Ukrainians have thrown everything, including the kitchen sink, at the Russians. But their progress on the battlefield has been painfully slow. To add more firepower to the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Americans are now going one notch up on the nuclear escalation ladder. They will now begin supplying depleted uranium shells to Kiev. The Russia-Ukraine war is not just a battle of weapons, it is also a contest of egos. After having sent the controversial cluster bombs, the Americans sending depleted uranium weapons to Ukraine makes one thing abundantly clear. At the heart of this war is NATO's expansion to the frontiers of Russia. And the Americans appear to have little hesitation in crossing one escalation threshold after another.
The Russian pressure on Ukraine is relentless. Moscow has struck the Ukrainian capital of Kiev in wave after wave of missile and drone strikes, as this footage from the 10th of September will show you. Despite the best anti-air defense systems supplied by the Americans and other European allies, the Russians have been successful at striking Kiev at will.
It was a very frightening experience. I can't even put it into words. I heard a motorbike sound of a Shahid drone flying over, a rustling sound. Then there was a powerful explosion, followed by a huge flash of light. I live on the first floor and the explosion wave was so strong that glass began falling down. My window curtain tore off and the jars I had on my windowsill were shattered.
But just when you thought things could not get any worse on the battlefield, the United States has announced that it will send depleted uranium ammunition. If the name depleted uranium made your heart skip a beat, then it should. First developed by the United States and the United Kingdom in the 1970s, depleted uranium is a byproduct that is obtained during the process of uranium enrichment. It is mildly radioactive. It has been linked to birth defects and can chemically contaminate the soil. It can cause skin irritation, lead to kidney failures, and can result in skin cancer in people who are exposed to it. Depleted uranium was first used by the Americans on Iraq in the Gulf War in 1991. The Iraqi city of Nasiriyah was bombed in 1991 and again in 2003. Numerous infants born here to parents who have lived continuously in Nasiriyah are said to have been born with congenital defects. Besides Iraq, depleted uranium weapons have been used in Kosovo in 1999. Depleted uranium is 1.7 times denser than lead. Weapons made of depleted uranium can penetrate straight through a tank's armor and erupt in a burning cloud of vapor. And when the vapor settles, it is poisonous and radioactive. But the United States refuses to acknowledge the impact that depleted uranium shells have long after their use on the battlefield.
There's been no increase of leukemia or other cancers and that have been established following any exposure to uranium or DU. And even the IAEA has stated unequivocally that there is no proven link between DU exposure and increases in cancers or significant health or environmental impacts. So I would push back on that.
Presently, there is no United Nations convention that bans the use of depleted uranium. Even though the United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, has repeatedly cautioned about the risk of radiation in depleted uranium weapons. On the 7th of September, Moscow put on this grainy video, which claimed that it has destroyed the new bases which Ukraine had set up to train its soldiers for the new Western weapons. Ukraine is now faced with a very tough choice. With the counter-offensive having made little progress on the ground and the Western allies making assessments that Ukraine is fast running out of time, it is difficult to predict what options Kiev has at its disposal.
The situation in Sudan is extremely dire. On the 10th of September, more than 40 people were killed in an airstrike in Khartoum, making it the largest single incident death toll since the civil war began in the nation in April. An estimated 4 million people are said to be internally displaced, while more than 1 million have fled from the country. Despite repeated attempts, no lasting truce has been achieved in this conflict that has dragged on for almost 5 months. So what really is the condition of the common people in Sudan at a time when this bruising conflict has fallen off the radar of the global media completely? Our next report gets you all the details.
Sudan's capital, Khartoum, has been reduced to an urban battlefield. But neither the Sudanese National Army or the rival paramilitary force called the Rapid Support Forces have been able to gain complete control of the city. On Sunday morning, an airstrike by the Sudanese National Army on a market resulted in 40 casualties. And as the conflict nears the 5-month mark, air and artillery strikes, even amidst densely populated urban areas, have intensified. General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the chief of the Sudanese army, was candid in his admission. If the war continues to drag on, then Sudan could split again.
We are facing a war, and if it is not resolved quickly, Sudan will be fragmented and its national unity will be destroyed. I appeal to the rebels to hand over their weapons because they are deceived and misguided. This war was invented to serve specific people. This war was all based on lies and will end soon because whatever was built on falsehood will not find support.
In the city of Omdurman, one of the worst affected in this conflict, the civic infrastructure has completely collapsed. There is acute shortage of essential basic supplies. Even those who were relatively well off before the conflict are now lining up for food once a day.
In many cases, we don't have enough supplies. We are deeply in pain when we face this problem. When someone comes to us asking for this aid, but they cannot find it, it is painful. We wish to find help and support from others to contribute to this work so it doesn't stop.
The civil war has meant that supply chains have been disrupted. Markets and factories have been either destroyed or looted. Aziza Harba and her family used up their life's savings to cross the border into South Sudan. For almost 4 months, her family used to hide under the bed every time there was artillery fired. But now, she and her children have found refuge in a squalid tent with very little to eat and no sanitation.
The war impacted our lives in many ways. I had a lot of things at home. I have never seen anything like this before. Many children got lost. Bombs destroyed our homes. We lost all our belongings. We lost some of our family members in this conflict, and that is why we are displaced. I feared for my children as well.
Even though Sudan is rich in oil resources, an acute shortage of fuel has gripped the nation. In places such as Khartoum, Darfur, Jazeera, and Al-Qadarif, people are lining up in long queues at fuel stations, where petrol and diesel are being sold at 3 to 4 times their official price. Despite domestic and international parleys, Sunday's air attack on a civilian market in Khartoum is the clearest indicator that the civil conflict in Sudan will drag on for a long time to come.
A gun battle erupted between Pakistan border forces and Afghan Taliban on the 6th of September. Both sides pinned the blame on each other for triggering the firefight, which resulted in the shutdown of their busiest trade crossing. In a separate incident on the same day, Pakistan military claimed to have repelled a cross-border raid from Afghanistan by hundreds of Pakistan Taliban militants. Caretaker Pakistani Foreign Minister Jalil Abbas Jilani tried to defuse the situation by claiming that the Chitral attack was an isolated incident and didn't have the sanction of the Afghan government. On Saturday, 7 more terrorists were killed by the security forces in an intense exchange of fire in the Chitral district. Since Taliban's ascension to power in Kabul 2 years ago, Islamabad and Kabul have had frosty relations. Islamabad has accused Kabul of harboring militants carrying out attacks on Pakistani soil, a charge denied by Afghan Taliban. Our next report explores this further.
It was a woeful Wednesday for Pakistan and Afghanistan relations. Diplomatic tensions were stoked as security forces from both countries exchanged fire at about 1 p.m. at the Torkham border crossing halfway between Islamabad and Kabul. Though there were no reports of casualties, one Pakistani border guard is believed to have been wounded. The gunfight was reportedly triggered when Afghan forces tried to establish a security checkpost on their side of the border, though they claim that Pakistani authorities were in the know.
It has been 6 days since works have started on that checkpost, and during that time, our side had a meeting with the Pakistani authorities. They didn't mention that we should not build it. The outpost is being built 400 meters away from the hypothetical border on the Afghanistan side.
Both countries share a 2,600-kilometer long, mostly mountainous border, which has been a bone of contention for decades. The border has been long disputed by Kabul. Sporadic gunfights and crossing closures have been a recurrent theme. Following the gunfire exchange, both sides blamed each other for instigating the gunfight, which led to the closure of Torkham, the key northwestern border crossing between Pakistan and Afghanistan, the same day. Hundreds of trucks carrying perishables, including fruits and vegetables, were stuck on both sides of the Pakistan-Afghanistan border crossing. Commercial activity and pedestrian movement has come to a standstill, inconveniencing ordinary people.
Yesterday there was a cross-border firing. We came to know there are some casualties on both sides. Due to this firing, we drivers and ordinary people are suffering a lot. They should stop this. We are lying on this road since yesterday.
On the same day, in a separate incident, Pakistani military said 4 Pakistani soldiers were killed in clashes with Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, in Chitral district, around 200 kilometers northwest of the capital, Islamabad. The TTP, on the other hand, claimed to have captured 2 military posts in the Bomburat area of Chitral in the cross-border raid, in which 12 TTP militants were also killed. Pakistan's homegrown TTP movement has increasingly emboldened since Taliban stormed to power in Kabul in August 2021. Over the first 12 months of Taliban rule in Afghanistan, Pakistan witnessed a surge of 50% in militant attacks, focused mainly in western border provinces. Given that both nations are in dire economic straits, these frequent skirmishes resulting in border closures don't bode well for both sides, both economically as well as diplomatically.
Clashes broke out on the 7th of September in a restive Palestinian refugee camp in southern Lebanon. The same Palestinian refugee camp, Ain al-Hilweh, was rocked by deadly fighting just weeks ago, in which at least 13 people had died. In the fresh fighting between Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas' secular Fatah movement and Islamist militants, at least 20 people were wounded. The fighting has also prompted hundreds of residents from the camp and its surrounding areas to flee. An uneasy truce had been in place since 3rd of August, but with the recent outbreak of fighting, the camp is once again on the edge.
Ain al-Hilweh is the largest Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon, home to more than 63,000 registered refugees, although some estimates peg the number to be even higher. Close to 400,000 Palestinian refugees live in Lebanon's 12 refugee camps, dating back to the 1948 war. These camps, including the Ain al-Hilweh, largely lie outside the jurisdiction of the Lebanese security forces. factional disputes spiraling into deadly violence is a common occurrence in Ain el-Hilweh. The latest episode of violence erupted late on Thursday, with heavy gunfire and shelling wounding at least about 20 people.
The clashes renewed last night and 20 wounded people with moderate to light injuries arrived at Martyr Mahmoud al-Hamshari Hospital. Most of the injuries were caused by shrapnel from rocket-propelled grenades. Of course, we put hospital crews, ambulances and emergency teams on high alert. Ambulances were sent to the camp to transport injured people and civilians out of the areas of clashes.
Earlier this summer, the Ain el-Hilweh camp had been rocked by several days of street battles between rival factions, after Fatah accused the Islamist groups Jund al-Sham and Shabab al-Muslim of gunning down one of their military generals, Muhammad al-Armushi, on the 30th of July. The uneasy truce in place since the 3rd of August was increasingly in danger of being broken, since the Islamist groups have not handed over the accused killers of al-Armushi to the Lebanese authorities, which had been a key demand by a committee of Palestinian factions. The committee had announced on Tuesday that their joint security forces will launch raids in search of the accused killers. In an attempt to forestall plans by the Palestinian forces, Islamist groups launched an attack on Thursday night. Caught in the crossfire are hundreds of camp residents who've been displaced from their homes and have taken shelter in a nearby mosque and in the municipality building of the city of Sidon.
As soon as the bombing started, we left immediately. We fled in panic. Even accidents happened on the road. People fell on the streets. Most people left. We couldn't believe how we ran out with our children. I have 4 children and 6 of my nephews. Only God knows how we have escaped.
Calls have been issued for a return to normalcy and peace. Though intermittent clashes have flared up, the fighting has temporarily subsided as of Friday. But the question is, for how long will this tenuous peace last in the Palestinian refugee camps of Lebanon?
Tel Aviv was rocked by violent clashes between Eritrean government supporters and opponents of the Eritrean president on the 2nd of September. Israeli riot police, in a bid to break up the clashes, shot tear gas, stun grenades and even live bullets. More than 100 people are believed to have been injured, some of them critically, in these clashes. About 18,000 Eritrean asylum seekers currently reside in Israel, unwilling to go back to a repressive regime back home. A couple of days later, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that Israel is considering to deport 1,000 Eritreans who had taken part in what he described as riots over the weekend. Our next report explores this.
The Northeast African nation of Eritrea is one of the world's least developed countries. Perched near the bottom of global rankings for human rights, press freedom, civil liberties and economic development, it has been led by the authoritarian president Isaias Afwerki since its independence from Ethiopia in 1993. Forcible conscription into military or civil service, disappearances, extrajudicial killings and prolonged detention are fairly common. Any form of resistance to Afwerki's rule is dealt with harshly. Consequently, 580,000 Eritreans have been forced to seek asylum in other countries. About 18,000 of them had arrived in Israel, most of them illegally through Egypt's Sinai Peninsula years ago. Upon hearing that their country, Eritrea, is planning a celebratory festival marking Revolution Day on the 1st of September in Tel Aviv, they were up in arms. Revolution Day commemorates the start of the Eritrean War of Independence against Ethiopia in 1961, while Canada, the Netherlands and the United Kingdom cancelled the 30-year anniversary celebrations planned by the Eritrean embassies in their capitals. Israeli police, citing freedom of expression, gave the go-ahead. Both asylum seekers and supporters of Afwerki's repressive regime gathered for the event in presence of the Israeli riot police. Violent clashes first ensued between the two Eritrean groups, and when police tried to break them up, Protesters collided with them as well. Israeli riot police resorted to firing tear gas, stun grenades and live ammunition. Not witnessed since October 2000 protests when Israeli police killed 13 Palestinian citizens of Israel.
I'm on the side that wants democracy, and so are all the Eritreans here. But there is no democracy in our country. That is why we are here. Israel and its police support the dictator, President Isaias Afwerki. And this morning, the Israeli police only beat us.
A special ministerial team was convened by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to assess the situation and to handle the illegal infiltrators, notwithstanding over half a year of protests over judicial reforms. Netanyahu patted himself on the back for building a fence on Israel's southern border with Egypt, which he claims has stopped hundreds of Africans from storming the state of Israel. In his opinion, though, the problem of those who entered before the fence was erected persists.
Now there remains the serious problem of the illegal infiltrators in southern Tel Aviv and other places. But what happened yesterday crossed a red line. This is rioting. It is bloodshed. It is savageness that we cannot accept. Therefore, the first thing that I'm doing is to wish a recovery to the policemen who were injured in the effort to restore order. We are seeking strong steps against the rioters, including the immediate expulsion of those who took part. It is hard for me to understand why we would have a problem with those who declare that they support the regime. They certainly cannot claim refugee status.
Israel, a country founded upon the ashes of the Holocaust, was established to house Jewish refugees who were persecuted in Europe and elsewhere. Ironically, they have resisted to extend the cover of international law to non-Jews. Palestinians are aware of this harsh reality only too well. 80% of Eritrean asylum seekers, whose plight is acknowledged by Western nations, have been recognized as refugees in other countries. Will the dysfunctional Israeli asylum system pressure the Eritreans to leave of their own accord? Or will it extend the treatment it itself received 75 years ago?
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War, and we will see you again next week.